Hello, it's Carissa with Love Lifts. How are you today? It's Sunday, and I want to go over a few things with you. Again, about abuse. But this time, today, it's going to be financial abuse. We do know that abuse is to treat a person or an animal with cruelty or violence regularly or repeatedly. And then financial abuse is your intimate partner or someone who has control or access, more control or access to financial resources, which diminishes the victim's capacity to support themselves and forces them to depend on the abuser financially. And we talked about being authentic last week, and part of my being authentic is admitting or having the heart to admit um, that I was financially dependent on um, my ex husband. And how did I get there? How did I become, how was I able to break free from the thought that I couldn't survive unless I had him? And he did a really good job setting it up and building um, up my thought process that I couldn't survive without him. And he did that through financial abuse. Um, he started off with, and he's a known person to be a provider. And again, partially, yes, he would take care of the family financially. So I can't ever take that from him. But the manipulation or the flip side of that coin was there came a level of control that he had to have in order for the flow of finances to be accessible to me. And that is in itself financial abuse because it shouldn't be a, well, let me go back. So, how do you break free from being in a financially abusive relationship? On top of the physical, on top of the emotional, another tool of an abuser is to use money. And we all know that we need it to be able to function in our world. Um, and having it is not a bad thing, it really isn't. But um, money in the wrong person's hands is a nightmare. So, what does it look like? For me, financial abuse was done in such a small increment, but I'll give you a couple of stories. And I'll start off with how I had two children younger. I have four altogether, but the first two, the girls, they were younger. And it was, and this is when I kind of knew, again, I knew something was wrong. Red flags were blaring throughout the relationship. But it still didn't, it wasn't enough to jolt me. It still wasn't enough. Obviously, I stayed for 22 years in an abusive relationship. But the first time that I actually could say, something's wrong here, was when it came time to file taxes. I filed taxes, and everybody knows you get a tax refund. And he he played it real good. And I can laugh about some of these things you'll hear me laugh about because after when you think about it now, it's kind of it's a little it's funny um, because I have a statement, but I probably shouldn't say it, but I say it anyway. Um, he's one of the smartest dumb people that I've ever met in my life. When I say that, and I don't mean that in a negative, I mean it sounds negative, but I say it. And nonetheless, because he fooled me, and I'm a very intelligent person. But so when I think about things, sometimes I kind of chuckle or I laugh a little bit because it is a little like, damn, how do you, you know what? He was slick. He got that one over on me. But with the taxes, he would, now mind you, you have to understand that if you're in an abusive relationship, the person who's being abused, their whole sole purpose is to function as the abuser's positive reinforcement. That's literally what you're there to do. So even though they're dishing out negativity towards you, you are there to reinforce their greatness. And we do a good job at that. Because we ignore everything, the red flags, we ignore, we become a lying, we begin to lie to ourselves about the situation, and we paint in our minds this great situation that really is not great. So again, I was already lying to myself about my situation and how great it was. And I wanted to please him. I wanted to make him happy. So came time to file for the kids, and he would always throw his little remarks in, how I never did anything for him. So it happened in stages. So I was always trying to, bend over backwards. I'm trying to prove that, I love him or I loved him, and that I was worth something. Even though I couldn't keep up with him financially. He made more money. He was gone more. He had the ability to make more money than me, which is okay. I'm 100% fine with that. It was the abusive piece of it that ripped my heart apart at times. And so when it came time for taxes, he had already worked up all year long how much he worked, how hard he worked. And I would be like, well, I'm filing taxes and we get this little money. Here you go. But then after I would give it to him, he'd be like, and then I would say, oh, I did this for you. He'd be like, oh, you didn't do anything. He said that money was for bills. You didn't help me out. That wasn't for me. That was for the house. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. I thought we were a part of a us, and the we in the house was helping out. But he would always minimize what I did. I would buy food, and I'm gonna tell this story. I wasn't going to, but I'm gonna tell it because I'm not embarrassed about what I've been through. I'm not ashamed. So I went through hoops trying to prove that I was a down chick, however you want to put it. And I went and applied for food stamps, and to bring more money in the house. I was working part-time, and I'll never forget it because I almost cried that day. So I went through that embarrassing line of going through the state and to get the food stamps to help us out. Because he was working, I went and got the food stamps, and I told him, I was like, man, I went to him before, because I literally ran everything by him before I did it. I was unable to make decisions by myself. I ran it by him first, and he was, I don't care, everything was whatever, if it helps the family out, whatever. He didn't really care at that time, or that's what he acted as if he didn't care. So I went and got the food stamps and stood, was embarrassed to go get them. The card was always like, I don't know, a key on something, they always said, because it never scanned. It always broke. And I took him to the store with me. So we get to the store and I said, oh, you can go inside, or can you get, the food? He said to me, I don't use stuff like that. I said, but we went to get, like, you said it was okay to apply for these food stamps. Why now is it a big problem for you to use them? And he made me feel so low and so small, in that moment, of all of the help that I was trying to bring to the house to make his life a little bit easier, to bring some type of, because I wasn't working full time, I was working part time. We had two kids, at the time, and he had other children as well, but we had two children together, and to put them into daycare was so much more expensive. So I wanted to be around more with the kids. But that I say to show you that the pieces of financial abuse that will happen in an abusive relationship, the minimizing of my help, the moving of the carrot, and that it was never enough. Nothing I did was ever enough for him. Withholding of finances, being out. The stories can go on for days. How he would buy $200-$300 pairs of pants, and when it came for the light bill or a gas bill, it wouldn't be paid, and the light would get cut. There have been times like we would come and he'd be laughing and kikiing outside with people, and the kids would be like, "Ma, does Daddy understand we don't have no lights, or our gas? We don't got no hot water?" And he would be having a whole party outside with people, and he would say, "Well, you work, you pay it." And I'm like, "Well, I'm already spending everything that I have on getting the little things that the kids needed." And but it was the whole fact that how he can minimize the assistance that I was bringing, and make himself seem so big, and then he would walk around and tell the world how much he did for us. Meanwhile, we would be out of lights, we would be without gas, we would be without food sometimes. um, and it's the whole point of um, withholding something to make his importance or his need of him um, be magnified. And he would do it in the cruelest ways, to the point where um, you would some days I would just sit there and cry, because I'm like, what more could a person do to show a person that you care and you want to see the family succeed? Even I remember going to college and um, coming home at working, coming home, cooking, cleaning, um, and hey, can you watch the kids so I can become a better person, so I can make more money and become like, you know, following this carrot that he kept moving the goal line. He moved it every single time, and I never made the mark. So when I graduated college, um, and made more money, and then I got a real job according to him, um, it started taking more of my time. Um, then he began to accuse me of sleeping with my boss. So it was always something where it never was good enough. And a lot of my stories are going to sound jumbled, or they're going to sound unclear, because in the moment, I'm still making sense of the level of craziness um, that being in a narcissistic relationship can do to you. So it sounds like it just can be all over. It sounds chaotic. The stories will sound chaotic because they really and truly are chaotic. It's a chaotic life. But when we come outside, we mask everything. And that was why I talked about authenticity. Um, but I do want you to ask yourself the question this week: how do you break free and regain your power, or taking your power back and not allowing someone to control you through the tactics that they will use, and financial being one of them? How do you take that back? And it happened slowly. It wasn't overnight, because there were some things in my mind that I had to um, stop believing. I couldn't think the same way. You have to change your thinking. Um, but I became accustomed to him carrying us financially, to the point where I didn't want to do it. Like, I was like, I don't pay that. I don't do that. And once he realized that my refusal of paying certain things, he would take it away. He did it with our mortgage. He did it with our rent. He's done it with everything. And I had to become independent within myself, to say, there are going to be times where I go without, so I can take care of myself and not put that level of power in another person's hands. And that's the point of, or the part where I say that giving someone the control over you. And it's a very scary thing to take that power back from someone, because I become responsible for me. And I didn't want to be responsible for me. Honestly, like, it was a daunting task for me to be responsible for myself. And leaving my home at 16, going into another parent like relationship, even though I'm intimate with him, he still was like my caretaker. And it sounds weird, it sounds horrific actually, but it's the truth. He, I, I basically finished raising myself with him. So I wrote down the three truths about myself. And if I had no fears, and finances weren't an issue, who would I be? And that was a question that I wrote a while ago. Who would I be if I didn't have all the fears of the financial piece? And each day, your strength is increased, and the despair is decreased, as you begin to do more things for yourself, as you begin to become more aware that someone is being financially abusive towards you, withholding the basic necessities for their family, and they begin to abuse third party. And eradicating abuse is going to be through prayer, and through people being honest with themselves first and others. And the last thing I think I'll say on the financial abuse piece is when they have kids, and he paints himself as this perfect human being. And as we had, gotten separated, and I had to basically rebuild what he dismantled, you begin to see yourself as less than when you're in the relationship with that person. You begin to question your worth, because you really start saying, am I really this bad? Is it me? Like, what can I do that's more, what more can I give? And you will break your brain trying to figure out what more can you do while they do less. All while saying with their words that they're doing more. And it's a smokescreen act where the smoke is going and there's no action. There's no real fire. There's nothing really happening. You're just believing because you've believed every word. You've fed on the words of your abuser for so long. And you become accustomed to the lies, and the lies become a truth for you. So as you go forward and you question, how do you break free? By becoming more dependent and trustworthy of yourself. I remember the first time I actually paid the mortgage, my own mortgage. And all along I thought I couldn't do it. All along I thought the only way I could survive was with his assistance, because he built the foundation of our relationship believing that he was the number one sustainer. He was the number one contributor to the financial establishment and success of our relationship. It wasn't so. I was the sustainer. Because I made up for it in so many other areas, going without, and I never bought myself anything for many years. I didn't buy myself pants, clothes. I always he looked a 1,000, and I didn't mind. Don't get me wrong. I just felt, for my kids at the time. And the first time, and my sister probably would laugh at this, because when we went to court, like, it was the one complaint that I could come up with was, when everything happened, my belts went missing. It was the first time I ever bought anything for myself. And it was a belt. It was a brown belt and a black belt. And when you are so deprived of the basic necessities, you and you leave the relationship and you begin to do for yourself, you begin to see what you have missed out on, what you didn't do for yourself. And it almost is bewildering, like it's a shock.